Good evening, everyone, and welcome to GW Prime Live. Throughout history, cities have been the engine of social transformation as well as the incubators of change and transformation. It won't be an overstatement to say that the history of civilization has been the history of urbanism, and all of this has been very closely interlinked with technological advancements and with latest innovations, as well as the changes in human behavior and geography. To discuss all this and more, we welcome today Professor Carlo Ratti, who is Director of MIT Senseable City Labs, as well as who is a famous architect, innovator, educator, and urban planner. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, Professor Ratti, you have been at the intersection of urban planning, architecture, technology, innovation, of new cities. So, we keep on hearing about smart cities, keep on hearing about the need to redesign cities of habitable urban spheres. But you have coined this very interesting term, sensible cities, sensory cities. So, how do we move from smart cities to sensory cities, and what would be the approach as per you?
Thank you. Well, first of all, let me tell you, I'm not a big fan of the name smart city. For me, smart city puts too much emphasis on the technology, not really on the human side of things. And that's really why at MIT, when we had to start our lab, we started using the word sensible city. Sensible is both able to sense, but also sensible city. And for us, that's a way to look at some of the trends, the technological trends are a fact. They are a reality. It's about networks, about sensors, about AI, about big data. All of that is happening. But instead of focusing on technology per se, like a lot of smart city initiatives are doing, we like to think that we can use the same technologies in order to improve urban life. And that's hence the name Sensible City. So that's how we started using it. And that's really the focus of what we do, trying to focus on the human side of things.
That's very interesting. The human side of cities, because I was reading your very interesting book, The City of Tomorrow, Sensors, Networks, Hacks, and the Future of Urban Life, which you co-wrote with Matthew Claudel. So you have a very interesting line in that book that cities are by definition plural, public, and productive, and they serve as a cultural petri dish. So, Professor Reddy, I would like to ask you, today, as we see proliferation of mapping data, proliferation of geoinformation, geotagging, and all of these sensors and actuators and all of these devices, so how can they be best deployed so that the average citizen can enhance his living experience in the city?
Yeah, well, and thanks for quoting the book. The book is a book from now a few years ago. It was published in 2016 by Yale University Press in the United States, and then translated in a few languages. But so things have evolved a little bit since then. But I think what is important from the book is really this idea that we need to combine top down and bottom up. And I believe we need to experiment with technologies. I don't like what is happening in some countries, for instance, today, where governments are trying to ban ChatGPT or this or that. I think the important thing is that we all experiment, and then we let citizens decide what they think, what they want. So citizens should be the one to decide what type of city they want to live in, and that includes, of course, also the technological component. So again, it's a balance between top down and bottom up. But I like to think about cities, as some people say, as living labs, places where we can experiment. We can use technology like an exogenous force, but then respond a little bit like in the way it happens with natural evolution, so that basically all of us, we can decide again what we like, what we don't like, and also how things should be used. The same technology can be used for good or for bad. We've seen technologies such as digital technologies being used, by minorities to fight oppression, or by government to oppress others. So somehow, that question is a political question, and we should all be part.
That's very interesting. Sir, one more interesting thing that since you are an architect and you have been at focus on architecture as well as urban planning, so you mentioned that all of these cities, they basically grow organically, they grow by people. Other than cities that have been master planned, that were parts of big plans and that were planned. As example, you have given Chandigarh, which was designed by Le Corbusier, and Brasilia, which was automotive centered city, Neymar. So, do you think in the future we need similar blueprint oriented master planned cities, or do we need cities that sprawl out organically by people's initiative, citizen collaboration?
Yeah, well, here again is a little bit of top down and bottom up. If you think about even the old Romans, when they had to start a new city, they usually would do a little master plan. That master plan was very simple. It was actually two axes. One was called cardus in Latin, one was called decumanus. They were orthogonal, and they were the beginning, the roads around which the city will develop. Now, if you don't do a little bit of master planning, we end up with informal settlements that sometimes, lack even roads to move through them. Think about favelas in Brazil, think about informal settlements all over the world. So somehow you need a little bit of master planning, but then, of course, you want to let organic bottom-up forces shape cities. And what you're seeing, there's a lot of literature, scientific literature about that. You see a city grows like a fractal. You almost think about it grows like a mushroom. There's actually interesting work that shows scientifically that the principles are similar, how a mushroom grows and how a city grows. And it tries to look at resources. Resources on the landscape could be, the access to water, to views, to beautiful places, and so on. So again, the city develops and evolves in this way. And if we only think about the city as a top-down thing, Chandigarh, I'm a great fan of the master plan of Chandigarh, but yes, it was too much top-down, so that in the end, for many years, now it's getting better. Little by little, the city organically adapted. But at least at the beginning, it was a city designed for the automobile, when at the time, over 50 years ago in India, most people had just a bike. So somehow there were a lot of inconsistency, and they were really because of a city designed only top-down. So there's always a little bit of top-down, as I was saying, as we've seen since Roman times, with a bit of planning for roads and so on. But then you need to really let the city evolve naturally and based on what people want. Again, the city would then follow some of the local conditions and adapt.
There's something very intriguing, and you have also mentioned earlier that in United States of America, the sprawl and the suburbia, which was centered around automobile, which started with Frank Lloyd George. So since then, that model has been emulated so many times in the developing world and even everywhere. So was there a one-size-fit-all approach in regards to urban planning that the planners and the decision makers didn't pay heed to earlier? And do we need a more diverse approach now, which is more localized and more, you can say, receptive of what the local communities and the marginalized people and those on the fringes need?
Yeah, well, you combine many different things, and I'll try to touch upon all of them. Some of them maybe we look at them a bit more in detail later. But starting with the automobile, and you mentioned before also Brasilia. Brasilia, again, is very beautiful when you look at it on a piece of paper. But when you land, you realize that it's a city, again, that doesn't take into account people. It's a city where it's very difficult to move. And of course, at the time when it was built, the idea was that, we should all move by car. Now, we know that if we only move by car, we have a lot of issues. We are less healthy, produce a lot of pollution, we spend a lot of time in traffic jam, and also we kill the community, because the community happens when people meet each other in public space, in streets, and so on. But at the time, of course, when Brasilia was built, that was the idea. And many American cities also have been following the same principle. Now, the pendulum certainly swung too much in one direction, I think 50 years ago at the end of modernism. Today, we're trying to do the opposite. We are seeing how, doing a city that starts from pedestrians, from bikes, from active mobility can really be much more healthy, both in terms of, human health and in terms of social health. And so all of that is also now taking a new dimension thanks to new technologies. Data allows us to get these kind of fleets of micromobility systems that are very interesting. Micromobility can be bikes, can be small vehicles. But again, why do you want to move 2 tons of steel just to carry around 70 kilos from one side of the city to another one? So I think micromobility is a good direction. Active mobility is very interesting. Digital is helping. New type of technological changes. Think about EVs and AVs, electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles tomorrow, will change a little bit, again, the dynamics. So somehow movement is inherent into the city. The city is a place that brings us together and in order to meet each other. And so we need to move in the city. But changing that platform and not making it like a single, monofunctional platform like with the automobile, I think is crucial in order to have better cities, more sustainable, both from a social and an environmental point of view. You touch upon other things, maybe we can look at them later, but I think I wanted to start with this because, you started the question starting from the automobile and also the link both to Brasilia and to suburbia in the United States.
Yeah. So post-pandemic, we saw the need for disaster resilience. We saw the need for designing cities that do not come to an abrupt halt. So what do you think needs to be done to make these cities more resilient to natural as well as artificial disasters and sudden disruptions and shocks?
Yeah, well, again, before we were talking about mobility and how, you want to multiply the different types of mobility. And if you think about it, it's almost like an ecosystem in nature. And we know that natural ecosystems become more and more resilient the more diverse they are. And I think there's something similar applies to cities. So, again, if you go to a city where not only mobility, but many of the different aspects of the city have grown organically, have created a very rich and diverse ecosystem, then you're going to have resilience as a consequence. I think your resilience is very difficult, again, to design top-down. You can do a little bit of it just for one dimension, but resilience is how you respond to the unexpected. And the best thing, like in natural ecosystems, is actually have the diversity that will make sure that part of the system will, some of the systems will still survive any type of shock.
So it's a step-by-step gradation from sustainability. It's a step-by-step process. This to make cities resilient. It's a gradation, we can say.
I think it is about diversifying. And diversifying means, again, taking into account bottom-up forces in order to have a more diverse urban fabric, a more diverse mobility system, a more diverse, energy system. I think what you don't want to have, like in nature, is just what in nature is monoculture. Think about, we've seen it, for instance, with the shock, the energy shock, because of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And then you've seen that some of the countries or cities that were just relying on one single source of energy, they got into big trouble. So again, diversifying, like in nature, is usually the best way to create resilient systems.
We see these days there's a scramble to build digital twins, which are basically virtual models, virtual 3D models that contain all of the information about particular cities, all of the data about them. So do you think that digital twins can help advance cities of the future in a more efficient and optimal manner?
Look, the digital twin, many of us, many of you are familiar with the GIS. Over the past 20, 30 years, GIS have been a way to manage digital information about cities or about the countryside, about the geographical system. And the digital twin, if you want, is the next step, is creating a full twin, as the name says, a twin in digital space. And then this digital twin can have real-time feeds. So in the digital twin, you can see real-time traffic information or many, many other things. And so certainly it's an interesting tool. It's a tool to combine all the data we got about cities and to analyze the data in order to make sense of it. I like the fact that some cities, such as Singapore, are using digital twin also to issue planning permits. It becomes a way to manage the city. To me, the important thing, however, is that digital twins should be open, again, to citizens. It shouldn't be just a top-down thing, this kind of big control room where you know everything about the city. It should be something where everybody can interface, add, suggest, and so on. And so if you use it that way, I think digital twin can really make a difference in the way we govern our cities.
We hear these days IoT, which you call a fancy moniker, Internet of Things, an extension of ubiquitous computing by Mark Weiser. So all of these devices, all of these sensors, all of these nodes, they're interconnected. And there's a very fascinating example of this city called Songdo in South Korea, which is an extension of Seoul. So a lot of people hail it as one of the most technologically advanced cities, a prototype for the future. So do you think we need to create more Songdos in every country, or that model has its own limitations?
Look, I think, first of all, what you said about Mark Weiser was a great computer scientist. He was working at Xerox PARC, and his idea was that computing would become embedded the basic computer would disappear in the environment, become invisible. At the time he was writing when people still were thinking about mainframe or personal computers. So his idea is actually now happening. So his vision is being realized. Now we got computing embedded and invisible everywhere. Our devices, our objects, our homes are full of processors, they respond to sensors, to whatever, anything from the heating, cooling system in your home to a Roomba that cleans your apartment to your car. Your car is becoming more and more like a computer on wheels. That was the vision of Mark Weiser. So that's one thing. It is happening. It has a lot of potential. For me, the potential I see there is that we can create systems in between the natural and the artificial world. If you want, technology smartness is a way by which buildings and the world of the artificial, the world of buildings, cities, and objects can start behaving a bit more like the world of nature. So things can respond like if they were alive. So I think that's the exciting thing in architecture and planning. The second question is what you mentioned about Songdo. Now, it depends what you're going to use those things for. And some of the criticism about Songdo was there at the very beginning, so I don't know how it is working today. At the very beginning, it was, yes, perhaps a bit too much technology focus. And so people were saying, well, you got all these kind of gadgets, but how is this going to change people's life? Is this really needed? And so on. So I kind of agree with initial criticism, but I haven't been to Songdo since before COVID, so I wouldn't want to say too much. But the key point here is that actually we got a great opportunity. As I was saying, the opportunity is that our buildings, objects, and cities can behave like real living things. And it depends, it's up to us to decide what we want to do with that potential. And if we just do it in order to add additional gadgets here and there, it's probably a wasted opportunity. If we do that in order to change and transform people's lives, in order to save energy, when you got a building that responds like a living thing, you can save a lot of energy. We did a project at MIT where we looked at what happens today. Today, you got buildings, and we keep on throwing a huge amount of energy to heat them during the winter, to cool them during the summer, to use lighting there, even when they're empty. So again, when you put just a bit of sensors and intelligence, the buildings can respond to people better, so we can save energy and also create a better environment for all of us to live and work. So again, the point is not the technology, the point is how we want to use it.
So should it be appropriate to say that for the next generation of urban planners and architects and city theorists, geospatial data and technologies should be very integral to how they plan and how they basically perceive things?
Yeah, totally. I would say, I've seen a huge change just in the past 5 years at MIT. If you look at everybody graduating from architecture today from MIT is also computer programming. Some people are more or less conversant with data, big data, analytics, but somehow everybody needs to have some skills because that's part of what architecture is. If you think about architecture, its definition has changed many times. If you go back to Vitruvius and go back to the initial treatise in the Renaissance in architecture was also about military architecture. If you look at Guarini's 18th century book, Treatise on Architecture, it was also about watches and the way of designing machines in order to measure time. So the definition of architecture has changed a lot, and has changed with technology. And there's no doubt that if you want to be an architect today, you need to be able to manipulate data, especially if you look at also what happened in the past 6 or 12 months, where every design office is using ChatGPT and natural language models in order to get inspiration at the very beginning, in order to, to browse what has been done and look at potential synthetic images to start and inspire the design process. So unless you got some skills there, well, today I would say you cannot be an architect anymore.
When we talk about cities, one of the main themes that always occurs is megapolises, that is cities with a population greater than 10 million. In the 1960s, there were only 2 such cities, New York and Tokyo. But now we have close to 35 cities, and by the year 2050, I think over 50 cities will have this much population. But these megapolises have their own problems of overpopulation, of resource scarcity, of congestion, of clusterization. So how do we break this model, or how do we overcome these constraints? Because we see a lot of people, they are flocking to big cities, and all of these opportunities are still concentrated in a handful of cities, maybe.
Yeah, well, what you're asking is very interesting. You're right. There's more and more bigger cities, but I want also to say something. I think the architecture profession and also mayors and politicians all over the world haven't fully realized that actually on most of the planet, the population is not going to grow anymore, is actually shrinking. I believe that even India, fertility rate now are around replacement rate. Most of South America is at replacement rate or below. I think Colombia, that a country that a few decades ago had a fertility rate of 6, now I believe is 1.7. 1.7, your population in 20, 30 years is going to be much lower. It's much below replacement rate. And so I think there's something that people haven't fully realized, that is that, in most countries, we don't need to build more urban fabric. Yes, some cities here and there are very attractive, but think about London. London just got back to the population it had 100 years ago. So I think, let's stop with this idea that we need to build a huge amount of cities. Yes, parts of Africa, small pockets in Asia are still growing and cities are still being developed. But I think the key challenge we have now is not to build more cities, is actually to improve the cities we have. Cities are 80% of emissions on the planet. If you look at the past 12 to 18 months, it looks like the planet might be on a much more accelerated course in terms of climate change. I think the data that came in the past 12 to 18 months is very concerning. It doesn't fit the models. The planet is warming much faster than people anticipated. And cities are the problem. Cities, again, 80%, 75, 80% of emissions. So the challenge, I would say, is not to build more cities. The challenge is to make the cities we have more sustainable, socially and environmentally.
That's food for thought. So basically, we need to improve on what we have rather than adding on new urban infrastructure. We need to enhance our cities socially as well as ecologically. So coming to that point, I was reading one of your projects at Senseable City was in Seattle. It was about geolocation. You use geolocation and georeferencing for a very smart waste management system. So do you think that cities globally can adopt sensors and geospatial intelligent systems, automated systems for basic amenities? And what can be done in that regard?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me tell you a bit more about this project. It was a project we started a long time ago, and we started putting little chips on trash in order to follow it and see what goes to the right place, to the wrong place, how we can improve the sanitation system in the city. And, that data then is the beginning for designing better systems. We discovered something that even the biggest companies in the United States, this was a partnership at the very beginning with Waste Management. Waste Management is a company, one of the biggest waste management companies in the United States, that even they were surprised about. Because again, when you get the data that nobody had collected yet, you discover problems in the system. You can see how to optimize it and so on, or also how to give information back to citizens, again, in order to change behavior. I remember that was one of the most beautiful things that some of the people working with us on the project told us, well, the way I'm going to recycle or throw away things is not going to be the same anymore after this. So I think, data is always interesting. Data can, if it's not biased and so on, it's a better knowledge of the city. And then feeding data into design can help us address some of the issues we have. So that project had a number of sequels, but I would say in general, and the project, as I said, started some time ago, 10 years ago, and we did a few follow-ups. But today, the amount of data is being multiplied. We've got big data to describe many dimensional cities, and certainly any architect should look at that. That was the dream of planners in the past. Ildefonso Cerdà, the father of modern Barcelona, in a great book called The Great Theory of Urbanization, he dreams about the day when data could actually, big data, at the time, there wasn't the idea of big data, but he describes it like big data could turn, he says, urbanism almost into a science. Now, that time has arrived. So if you want to be an urbanist, if you want to deal with urban planning, design, and architecture, you cannot ignore that dimension, the digital dimension that describes our cities.
So one more interesting thing that you mentioned about that project and the sensors. So I would like to ask you, when we design cities, when cities are designed, earlier the stakeholders, the participants were mainly government bodies, municipal organizations, or maybe say construction firms. But now we see more and more technology companies, data providers, even the likes of Google and Microsoft, they are also very actively involved in city planning, in all stages of city planning. And due to smartphones and due to social media networks and data transfer, so this access, technology access, as well as software, they have totally redefined city planning as well as citizen behavior. So what do you think is the next step in this?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't be so radical. I don't think that big technology companies have yet redefined urban life. But you're right. The fact that the city is now the intersection between digital and physical means that a lot of players in the digital space are impacting the city. And more than the big technology companies you mentioned, Microsoft and many others, they're working, for instance, with digital twins. But the other component is think about Uber. Uber would not exist without real-time information. Uber was a consequence of smartphones and the iPhone being introduced. So, it's just something before that you would not have been able to. I'm saying Uber, but I could talk about any other similar company, both in mobility, in sharing mobility like Zipcar or similar things. All those things are based on real-time information flowing in the cities. So our technology companies having a huge impact in terms of improving or even making the city worse. We know that some of these companies are creating and generating a lot of new traffic. So the point is, I wouldn't be as radical as you've been, but I would say that yes, when the city is at the intersection between digital and physical, then anybody interested in the digital dimension and companies dealing with the digital dimension will also become urban actors.
So that brings us to our riddle, like a catch-22 situation with so much data, with so much spatial data, non-spatial data, with so much of citizens' data. So would data be treated as a common good that has to be safeguarded? Because the questions of data privacy, data security, and to prevent, say, nefarious people from accessing that data would also arise. So how would future cities navigate this?
Yeah, well, the different types of data. For instance, a lot of open data initiatives. Some of them were launched initially by Barack Obama during his presidency, so they're quite old. And some cities such as London, or New York, built a lot upon them. Initially, open data was about a lot of data that cities have anyway to make it accessible. Think about, for instance, cities still today collect a lot of data about cities, city governments, about the city itself, collect data about the city itself, about different aspects. It can be about planning, it can be about changes, transformation, even about mobility. Mobility is regulated in most cities, so a lot of cities collect data from taxis, public transportation. So a lot of open data initiatives have been just take the data. Many times the data is kind of public anyway. You're just making it more accessible by sharing it, by making it open, or by allowing researchers, for instance, to use it. So in that case, usually there's not many problems. The problems are when you actually deal with other data that's very important for the city that is related to individuals. And there, of course, as you say, we need to be very, very cautious. So I think that GDPR in Europe, and now GDPR has inspired, for instance, the privacy regulations in California. GDPR is a good way to go. The principle is very simple: is that people have to give consent on how their data is being used. The other thing, if you're not in a GDPR environment, at MIT when we do research, we always go through the ethical review board. So we got a board reviewing things, which is the same thing that happens in medical medical circles with ethical reviews. So somehow, yes, you need to put in place all of that, and technology itself can help, because technology can help you to anonymize in different ways the data, to aggregate it, so that you can still get very interesting insights, but you don't infringe onto people's privacy. So that's in a nutshell. Again, there's not a general rule, but it depends on the taxonomy of data. And then some data, yes, can have issues. You need to dare to be very cautious about privacy regulations such as GDPR. And if there's not enough, or in addition to that, also, do your own ethical review inside your institution, be a university or a city government.
So if I would ask you, which are the 3 cities in the world that you think are very well technologically integrated, as well as have followed all sustainability and resilience guidelines to the hilt, what would they be?
Yeah, well, I think, that's a question I get a lot because people want to know, tell me number one, two, and three. I don't think you can say that, but I think you can say that, like, in a startup ecosystem, you got different winners and losers. You got cities experimenting with something, other cities experimenting with something else. Like we could say that, for instance, Singapore has been at the forefront of experimentation with mobility, both in terms of electronic road pricing, self-driving, and so on. Cities such as Copenhagen are really pushing the agenda, Copenhagen or Helsinki, pushing the agenda in terms of sustainability. Cities such as Boston have been, over the past 10 years, working a lot for citizen engagement with a project called Urban Mechanics, trying to engage citizens in Imagine City. Milan has been really working a lot with the mayor, with Mayor Sala in the past, I think, 7 years or so, a lot on bringing nature back to the city. So I think different cities do different experiments. The good thing is that when you find something interesting, other cities can get inspired and, adopt some of those ideas.
So my last question would be, around say 5 decades back, Louis Mumford said something very interesting, that cities are the theater of social action, and they provide the aesthetization of collective initiative. So we now, since then, a lot has changed. We are into digital, we are into data, we are into virtual reality, we are into these immersive, interactive technologies. So, what should be the ethos and the philosophy for new age urbanism, say 20 years down the line?
Well, first of all, you mentioned Louis Mumford. He was a great researcher about cities. His book, The City in History, is still, an amazing survey of this incredible invention of humanity. Cities that were born around 10,000 years ago and became one of the greatest engines of human civilization, as he says, to bring us together. Cities are something that bring us together, so together we can be more than each of us individually. Incidentally, the idea of aggregation happens in many other ways in nature, but humans only think about termites, think about even bacteria that live in small communities, are very similar to cities. They're called biofilms. But actually, humans discovered it only 10,000 years ago, and then this kind of beautiful journey started, which is an accelerator of human life and human civilization. Anyway, I think that still holds. I think they should be our inspiration. And by the way, when you mentioned Mumford, another thing came out, that it came to mind, that is related to what we were discussing before. I remember one of his sentences, forget the damn motor car, and we need cities for lovers and friends. I think this should be the manifesto for cities of tomorrow.
That's a very underrated but very impactful quote that you mentioned, and that should be the guiding light for all bottoms up initiatives and all collaborative and collective measures. So, anything else that you would like to add, Professor Reddy?
No, thank you for the conversation, and the conversation not to be continued. If any of you listening also are in one of the places where we are, like in Boston, in New York, in Turin, London, do stop by and we'll continue the conversation. Yeah. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much. Yeah, you too. Have a great day ahead.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Hello and welcome to GW Bulletin, the daily dose of geospatial news on GW Prime Live. I am Jeffy Jacob, and here are the latest happenings. NVIDIA is to acquire the Israeli startup Run AI, which develops software for handling artificial intelligence computing resources. The acquisition is estimated to be valued at $700 million as per a Bloomberg report. The purchase of Run AI is NVIDIA's biggest acquisition in Israel since purchasing Mellanox for $6.9 billion in March of 2019. Since the acquisition, NVIDIA's local R&D center in Israel, which was first established in 2016, grew by about 100%, reaching 4,000 employees in the country. Russia has vetoed a UN Security Council resolution calling on all nations to prevent a dangerous nuclear arms race in outer space. The resolution, sponsored by the United States and Japan, would have called on all countries not to develop or deploy nuclear arms or other weapons of mass destruction in space, which are largely banned under a 1967 international treaty. Coca-Cola has started using AI services from Microsoft with a $1.1 billion 5-year deal US to use its cloud computing and artificial intelligence services. Coca-Cola has recently started experimenting with generative AI for its marketing, manufacturing, and supply chain. And with this strategic partnership, Coca-Cola is exploring an opportunity to leverage AI to improve customer experience, streamline operations, and foster innovation. Satellogic, a sub-meter resolution Earth observation data collection company, announced that it has signed a letter of intent with One Amazon, a company focused on creating sustainable impact for the environment and investors by using next-generation technology to bring innovation to conservation. Satellogic will look to support One Amazon's creation of the Internet of Forests, a large-scale sensor network that, along with machine intelligence infrastructure, will be used to monitor key variables within the Amazon rainforest. The National Bank for Agriculture and Rural Development unveiled its Climate Strategy 2030 document. This comprehensive strategy aims to address India's escalating need for green financing. NABARD's Climate Strategy 2030 is structured around 4 key pillars to address this demand. 1 is accelerating green lending across sectors. 2, playing a broader market-making role. 3, internal green transformation of NABARD and strategic resource mobilization. This strategic initiative not only reinforces NABARD's commitment to environmental stewardship, but also positions it as a pivotal player in India's transition towards a resilient and sustainable economy. International Business Machines will buy HashiCorp in a deal valued at $6.4 billion, expanding its cloud-based software products to tap into an AI-powered boom in demand. HashiCorp pioneered open-source software that developers rely on to control cloud infrastructure. Premium versions of the Terraform cloud management software and other products have brought revenue to HashiCorp. CoStar Group, a provider of online real estate marketplaces, information, and analytics in the property markets, announced that it has reached a definitive agreement to acquire all outstanding shares of Matterport in a cash and stock transaction valued at $5.5 per share, reflecting an estimated $1.6 billion of enterprise value. Matterport produces a line of innovative 3D capture devices, including the company's flagship LiDAR-based Pro 3 camera, which is capable of high-precision indoor and outdoor capture. Rocket Lab USA announced that it has been selected for a $32 million US Space Force Space Systems Command contract to deliver the Victus-Hayes Tactically Responsive Space Mission. The mission will see Rocket Lab design, build, launch, and operate a rendezvous proximity operation capable spacecraft. The mission was contracted under Rocket Lab National Security, a wholly owned subsidiary that serves the US and its allies with responsive and reliable launch services, spacecraft manufacturing, and space systems capabilities. Seattle-based Radical has raised $4.5 million to support the development of solar-powered autonomous airplanes that can beam down connectivity and imagery during long-duration, high-altitude flights. Radical's mission is to develop autonomous, solar-powered, propeller-driven aircraft that can fly continuously in the stratosphere without landing. The lightweight aircraft could carry payloads for a wide range of applications, including imaging, remote sensing, and telecommunications. NASA successfully has launched its Advanced Composite Solar Sail System spacecraft from New Zealand. Riding atop Rocket Lab's Electron rocket, the innovative spacecraft aims to utilize sunlight for propulsion. Scheduled to orbit 1,000 kilometers above Earth, the solar charged craft boasts an 80 square meter measurement post-deployment, which occurs approximately 25 minutes after liftoff. Waymap, a London, UK-based technology company offering a navigation app that works outdoors, indoors, and deep underground, raised £7 million in funding. The round was led by TELUS Pollinator Fund for Good with participation from Vendrix and Compreda Holdings. Led by CEO and founder Dr. Tom Pay, Waymap offers a precise navigation app which works indoors, outdoors, and underground. Independent of GPS, Wi-Fi, or mobile data, the navigation is based solely on an algorithm, SmartStep, which uses only the motion sensors on a smartphone and the user's steps. Chinese tech giant Huawei unveiled a new brand for intelligent driving. The new brand, Huakun, intends to empower intelligence in the driving chassis, audio and driver's seat, and provide ultimate user experience, according to Jin Yuzi, CEO of Huawei's Intelligent Automotive Solution Business Unit. 2024 will be the first year for mass commercialization of smart driving, and the cumulative number of cars on road equipping with the Huawei self-driving system will top 500,000 by the year end, Jin said. Apple has acquired the Paris-based artificial intelligence startup Data Caleb amid its push to deliver on-device AI tools. Data Caleb specializes in algorithm compression and embedded AI systems. While the financial details of the transaction remain undisclosed, the move is a part of Apple's broader strategy to bring more sophisticated AI technology to its devices. Tata Consultancy Services had partnered with Amazon Web Services to accelerate its customers' cloud transformation journey at scale. The agreement with AWS will enable TCS to facilitate full-stack digital transformation of enterprises by leveraging data and generative artificial intelligence solutions on AWS. The company said this in a statement. TCS will provide businesses with tools to create modern architecture using cloud-native capabilities. And with that, we come to the end of this live bulletin. See you next time with more geospatial news. Have a great day.
A digital elevation model, or DEM, is a 3D representation of a topographic surface of the Earth, excluding trees, buildings, and any other surface objects. It's made up of a grid of elevation points. It can be used to create topographic maps, visualize landforms, and analyze terrain data. There are different ways to create a DEM. One popular method is using LiDAR to provide accurate elevation data. Another method is stereophotogrammetry, which uses two or more overlapping aerial photos to create a 3D model of the terrain. DEMs have many uses in various fields. In civil engineering, it can be used to design and plan infrastructure projects, like roads, bridges, and buildings. In natural resource management, it can be used to analyze soil erosion, floodplains, and deforestation. The military also uses DEMs to plan and execute operations in challenging terrain. There are many benefits of DEM. It provides accurate and detailed information about the terrain. which can be used to make better informed decisions. It also allows for 3D terrain visualization, which can be very useful for project planning and communication.
Hello everyone and welcome to Jesus of Prime Time. This is Sachin Awana, your host for today's case study episode. This case study captures how ways coastal monitoring sector is leveraging photogrammetry for enhanced flood and erosion risk management ways. Funded by the Welsh government, WCNC undertakes annual baseline surveys across the Welsh coastline using drones and safe zone software. These surveys aim to monitor erosion, assess flood risk, and inform coastal management decisions in the face of rising sea levels and change. By leveraging photogrammetry, WCMC